For me, music is very, very important. I listen to the music throughout the day or the night. I used to contemplate with the music in the usage without light, just with the headphones.
I think you should answer.
I contemplated music to 5 to 6 hours in the night till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. So through the music, I had all divine experiences. And second thing I want to tell you, for me the language doesn't make any difference. For me, the note. For example, if somebody is using the live music, I just enter to the music. So I can have the same feeling what you have it, how the notes going. If it's there's the vocal or the CDs, I just listen only the note. So only through the music, maybe I'm addicted to the music. I always have a divine experiences. And for me, the language doesn't make any difference.
So what is the question?
Yes, well, first of all, what is the question? I was going to say, I think you're very lucky. Maybe I should have been clearer when I talk about language. I don't mean English, French, Sanskrit, Hungarian, whatever. What I mean is that in every music, Indian music, Japanese music, Chinese music, there are systems, as Sri M said, for putting each music together. In Western European music, there are a whole list, harmony, the shape of melodies and what that means, rhetoric transformed into musical shapes, rhythm, the role of a bass underneath a melody if the music is written like that and so on. That's what I meant by language, the musical language.
Yeah, that is for the player or singer.
That's for the player and the singer. But I mean,
talking about the listener. Yeah.
Yes, but I did say, if you remember, I was quite careful to say that I had to understand those languages. The listener doesn't have to. And that is why I don't go along with the normal cliche that says music is a universal language that everybody understands. That doesn't make your experience any less important. But it means that your experience, which sounds fabulous, I'm quite envious of you, you're very lucky, your experience is not the same as her experience or his experience or indeed my experience. And what I was trying to communicate also is that for the performer to be able to give you that experience, he has to be very disciplined and very trained in a whole bunch of things that you're quite right. They don't matter to you. They don't need to matter to you, but they sure need to matter to me. Yeah. Otherwise it's not going to work for you. You know, that's the thing about as you said earlier on about discipline. About I know very little about Indian music, but one of the things that immediately came into my mind as he was talking about the Indian scale, is that scale is compared with some Indian musics. A very simple one. It's quite simple, like ours is quite simple. 8 notes make an octave. But I know some Indian colleagues in London who are using not 8-note scales, but 12-note scales, 16-note scales, 24-note scales, and on to a level where I can no longer accurately hear the change from one note to another, because my hearing is not trained like that. Those are languages. That's what I meant by language. I absolutely agree with you that one can be intensely moved by that. By the way, if anybody's curious, the last singer, the last CD, was an English soprano called Emma Kirkby. And if you ever want, if you're not sure of what music to play at your funeral, that's it. Because this idea of the sublime, of transcendence, when she's singing the music that suits her, and when she understands, by the way, she's very English, but she's singing in German there, and her German pronunciation is absolutely perfect. We had a voice coach who didn't have to do anything because Emma was already there. But the ability to communicate the meanings of that music in a sound which we don't have to understand in that detail, but you just hear the sound and experience it, and you can, if you're lucky, you have what you described. Lucky you. It's great.
I just want to ask you, voice or some melody has a higher vibration, because when I listen to somebody's voice, I go, for example, just right. Everybody was clapping, but I couldn't clap because I'm in front of God. So when you're in front of God, how you clap? So
oh, I think God.
Just do like that.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't met your God. My God is perfectly happy if people clap.
Not just that. Not just that. I close my eyes because I never open my eyes when I listen to music.
Sure. Hey, I think what's clear with this is that each person in this room will have a different experience of music.
No, my question is, any voice or some melody has a higher vibration to go very fast in the higher.
Technically, yes. I mean, you know, sound waves function at different speeds of wave that change as the notes go higher. There are a number of sopranos in the world who claim to be able to break a glass. You know, if you hit the right note at the right intensity, and you have the right glass in front of you. You know, the intensity of the sound wave can actually penetrate glass, which is why in this sad, sad world people use music, I'm afraid, also as a torture device.
Yes.
You know, because you can make people seriously ill. On a lighter-hearted note, but it is a fact of professional musician life, like tinnitus in my left ear, from 60 years more than 60 years of making noise here. And most Western music, orchestral musicians, by the end of their careers are measurably deafer than they were at the beginning. Yes, it's very sad, but it's because the sound waves penetrate. You know, the relationship between the sound and the hearing mechanism. So yes, and this is why, if you noticed, I mean, both the recordings with voices, I thought about changing it, and then I thought, no, I'll leave it. They were, yes, sopranos. Sopranos have a sort of built-in advantage because they reach that area of sound where, you know, where the effect somehow is very special.
Do you sing yourself?
Yes, but not very. Only the bhajans and the gospels.
Gospel.
Gospel and bhajans.
Do you have any favorite singer in Indian music?
I like all classical singers, and not all.
Is it the voice or
For me, it's not the voice, because I tell you one day, 30 years ago, that time I was young, not for classical, you know, for modern. Somebody has given me some old CDs, so I was listening, not CDs, old records, you know.
Mm-hmm.
M.S. Subbulakshmi and K.J. Yeshudas. When I listened to M.S. Subbulakshmi, I was in the contemplation. I was very young, tears. K.J. Yeshudas is the top singer, but I didn't feel anything. The same thing, not all the singers. Certain singers, when I feel it, I become very emotional.
Someone, Venkat is putting up his hands.
No, I'm not to answer that.
Okay. Ask me or ask the professor?
I can ask both.
Okay.
Go for it.
When you were describing music, I couldn't help but using parallels with food. Do you think there's any link between
Parallel?
music and food?
Music and food.
Woohoo!
Oh, okay, let's go. Yes. Can I answer that quickly? There are, at a very basic practical level, I spent 30 years as a sort of touring freelance musician, and the one thing that you have to do, apart from doing the rehearsing and the concert and so on, is eat. Yeah? And so one of the very positive aspects of touring musical life, if one's open to it, I used to travel with a good restaurant guide and a good hotel guide, and well, because the alternative is to eat badly, and it's very difficult to make good music on bad food. I mean, you smile nicely, but it's true. Yeah? So there's that level, and then there's the creative level, of course. I mean, we all experience things. We're back on the idea of the five, as it were, human bodily resources, hearing and smell and so on. And three of them at least have to do with food. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? At least those three. Maybe with some foods even, what does it sound like? You know, crunchy food. And so on. And so we're using those human resources as well. But I think you know, I think great cooks are at least as much worthy of admiration as great musicians.
Because I was thinking when you said that music can unite people, like as a language, food could unite people.
Sure, absolutely. And you could say that you know, it's a good idea to not to wait with you know, not to go without breakfast. You know, I mean, I do think I do spend a certain amount of time, or did when I was teaching very regularly and responsible for a class. It was an important part of sort of Holloway semester Eingangspredigt was, you know, please eat well, please look after your body. It's better to do half an hour's practice less a day and do whatever it is, Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, yoga, meditation, that you're looking after your body and the soul inside it, and that's more important than another hour of this. And good food is part of it. Absolutely it is.
Eastern music incorporates more polyrhythms and microtones, and I think there's a link with spirituality too, because Eastern spirituality and religion is about looking inward, and it's like infinitely complex, whereas the Western music, it's like as a reflection of religion, it's more about purity. You know, it's about really nailing the pitch, playing together. Do you think that from the very onset of human history, music and spirituality have been linked? And do you think that the Eastern-Western comparison is fair?
Well, the easy part is, has music always been linked to spirituality? Yes, I think so. That's an easy, short answer. The Eastern and Western music comparison, I think, is, if I may say so, too general. I'm not an expert on Eastern musics, by the way, plural, many plurals. You know, the differences between Indian music and Chinese music are probably at least as big, maybe in some respects bigger, than between Western music and Indian music. I mean, Chinese music is based on a 5-tone scale, a pentatonic scale. For trained Western ears, it is very, very simplistic, therefore. It doesn't have anything like the complexities of some Indian musics. And by the way, you know, I'm treading on very dangerous ground here. I'm outside of my knowledge territory. But so far as I know, the number of spoken languages in India is enormous, and therefore the number of musical languages will be enormous as well. And certainly the thing about microtones and so on, that exists in modern Western music as well.
But it's more found in like the experimental, so to speak, like avant-garde subset for Western music, right? Because usually it's like if you hear, you know, the human ear does like a million calculations as you're listening, and you can tell when things are out of tune, and some people are averse to that when they hear microtone or microtonal music.
Sure, yes. That to some extent includes me. There was a phase in my career when I did a lot of contemporary music in London, and microtonality, you know, by then I was, whatever, 22, 23, 24, 25. I'd been playing the violin since I was 5 years old, and listening to, in a way, a very kind of mainstream, traditional kind of Western classical music because of my background. And so for me, microtonality was exactly as you described. It was a sort of experimental area. The person who I knew in that phase in London well, who was most comfortable with that, was a violinist called Levin Andrade, who is Indian and had grown up in microtonal, multitonal Indian scales. As I said earlier, 12 tones, 16 tones, 18 tones, 24 tones, and so on, and seem to be able to hear accurately in that kind of thing. For me, beyond quarter tones gets to be kind of tricky. One of the fun things... Is this a result
of your classical training because you spent so long trying to...
Of course, yes. I mean, the human beings are habit bound. I love what he said about, though, that if we give us ourselves the opportunity, then you can go beyond your habit, and that's fine. Speaking for me personally, and I can't speak for colleagues who aren't here, and if they were here, they would speak for themselves. Speaking for me personally, the world in which this music is, I mean, I deliberately, in the end, stayed within the 17th and 18th centuries of European, partly theatre music and partly religious music. And inside of that little world, there is a universe of expressive possibility. And I'm only one person, and I was performing for 60 years, and in that time I got a little way along the road in that music. One of the things that we can do today with the smartphones that are in this room, thank you that not too many went off while we were talking. You can listen to anything you like. Do it. I think it's absolutely fine. To be good at one of those things takes a lifetime of hard work. To be good at two of them, you have to be very, very, very exceptional. There are some people who can do jazz, and there are some people who can do... In that phase in London, I was doing a range of music from 1600 to 1980 or 75 or something, and in the end the brain stews. You have to. I have an American colleague who has a wonderful phrase: a musician needs to have time to muse. It's a nice word. You need time to think or to not think, to sit under the tree and listen to the flute. And hope that nice girls will come by, or whatever. And you need also, which I could have talked about for hours and hours, you need time to have a life. You might want to have a family with children who have their own idea of what music is, and so on and so on and so on. We do the best we can. But I don't think it's okay to say this music is more developed or better than that music. Isn't it great that there are so many different musics out there? As he said, listen to it,
What about the famous sound of silence?
Music consists of the sounds and the silences between the sounds. Remember the beginning of that wonderful last piece? Bom, 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 bom. And if the silences weren't there, it wouldn't be the same. And then the silences can be, of course, longer and longer and longer. 2 days.
Was that piece that you played with people from all over the world, was that a canon?
Actually, no, it wasn't, but the bass pattern is similar.
Yeah, the silence that the bass had almost like created a vulnerability in the piece. When the bass cut out, then everything else could cut through.
Isn't that interesting? Good, I'm glad it was like that for you. You see what I mean? Maybe I've done too much sort of Socratic method teaching, but I don't believe in saying it can only be this, because I know that quite clearly that you have, well thought, intelligent responses to music, not all of which will agree with me. That's fine. The great thing is that you have responses to it, And what I experienced when I was a student as a teaching was the style then. It goes like this, because I am the teacher and I know better than you, And I'm going to tell you, that's how it goes. And there's a phase where one has to accept that, because there are certain things that, as he said, you have to learn things. But nowadays you can't teach like that. You have to find other ways. And one of them is to accept that no one person is right about everything. Thank goodness.
I have a question. Is it true that if the cows listen to the music, they give more milk?
It's been researched, yes, and they say that, I can't remember which it was, Vivaldi has this effect and Mozart has that effect. I don't know. I don't know whether they've tried Rolling Stones on Swiss cows. But yeah, apparently, animal. It's absolutely for sure animals respond to music. What it does for milk production in Swiss cows, I don't know.
I have something to say about that.
Yes, please.
A question about the silence. About this sound of the silence which you're talking about. Literally there cannot be sound in silence, literally. Because either you say there is sound or you have silence. But let me assure you that from my understanding, silence is not the absence of sound.
Mm-hmm.
Silence is not just the absence of physical sound. Silence is something to do with the mind. When the mind is silent, no matter what sounds you make, it's still silent. How? Now, music has the capacity, I think to my knowledge, to take you to that point where the mind becomes quiet.
That's it, quiet.
Yeah, quiet. And in that, what happens is, sometimes due to various reasons, the mind is not quiet, it's not silent. Now then you can cut off all sounds, but you still have no silence. So, unless that silence, because the mind, it reads, it studies, it tries to understand, and then it's crowded with all these theories. And therefore there is no space and there is no silence in the mind. Mm-hmm. When that happens, then it's the silence which is not the absence of sound. That silence can be seen in music. If you can understand what I'm trying to say, when it's very quiet, when the mind has become very quiet. When two people talk, what you'll figure out generally is that I have studied and understood something, and I think I'm right. You have studied and understood something, and you think you're right. So actually we are not communicating, because I am right and you are right, so there is no communication. If I say, you and I, can we sit down and sort a problem out together, then there is silence. Because I'm not imposing my views on you and you're not imposing your views on me, so there is a silence. Now that silence is the silence of understanding. On a different note, this is funny, but I went to a speaker once who was talking on the power of silence. So he sat down and I sat down and we looked at each other. There were other people also. They looked at each other. And then they looked at each other. Then they looked at each other. Then they went home and he went home. Power of silence. This happened in Germany. So that I can't understand that, but certainly silence is not the absence of sound. It's more to do with your mind, and when the mind is fully absorbed, there is a natural silence, not imposed. Right.
Yes?
This question is for both. I was sitting in the back, partially because I was afraid I would fall asleep. And
Well, it was so boring.
no, when I like something, or when it gives me soothing effect and I fall asleep. The thing that worries me when I fall asleep in public is maybe I snore. Now, that actually gave me this question. When you're talking about sound, can there be a good sound and a bad sound?
Oh, wow. I think there are situations where I think sound has, in the modern world, is approaching possibly bad sound, that it's so loud and it's so continuous, and it's very often used unconsciously. So I would encourage everybody to listen to music, but please, in a public space, use headphones, for example. You know, that one of the modern catastrophes is the idea that everybody can go around playing their favorite whatever it is, from Wagner opera to ICDC, on their smartphone, and not care that everybody within 40 meters has got to listen to it as well, whether they want to or not. And so I would say that bad sound, in the sense of invading other people's stillness, is something that we need to be more and more aware of. There's dangerous sound. You know, people's hearing gets damaged by sound, and I'm not just talking about the obvious ones. If you have a road drill being used, right there. I also sadly have to say that in Western classical symphony orchestras, the ability to play incredibly penetratingly loud on some instruments, which has to do with playing technique, and it has to do with the technology of making the instruments is so highly developed, that colleagues, the hearing of colleagues sitting in front of them is being damaged, and I would call that, in a way, bad sound. In other words, I mean, it's a simple thing, isn't it? We should try not to damage other people with the things that we like or feel that we should do or need to do. About silence, you know about the John Cage piece, the 4 minutes 33 seconds. John Cage was a very, very interesting composer, philosopher, thinker about life in general. And he wrote a piece which consists simply of somebody going on the stage and sitting at an open grand piano for 4 minutes 33 seconds and not playing anything. And of course, in a public performance, there is constant sound. People are breathing, people sneeze, somebody laughs because they find the silence embarrassing, etc., etc. So the next experiment with that was to record it in a completely soundproof studio, where they discovered that the movement of the air in the room makes the strings vibrate, and that in fact, if you listen to the recordings on good headphones, you can hear sound. So again, it's a different version of the thing of saying there isn't, in that sense, there isn't silence. There is stillness, perhaps you could say, different levels of energy, for sure. But silence, really? Eva, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, it was actually about the silence, and I wanted to ask you, Syrian, because I know you are John. Are you bothered by music coming out?
Say that again.
Are you bothered, or are you fine with music in hotels, airports, elevators, shops, restaurants? Do you bother? Because I know that John is so much against music everywhere in the public space. So how about, and it was actually the question about the silence or no music. That would be interesting.
Yeah, but sometimes it's quite irritating, to be honest. I don't mind snoring, of course. That's okay. Everybody snores at some point. It's a natural phenomenon. But in fact, somebody said to a doctor that I snore so much that I can't sleep in my room. So he said, go and sleep in the next room. But it's not about that. But this music you're talking about in hotels and wherever you go, that's because it's more of a cacophony than a rhythm. I mean, hardly any rhythm in its cacophony. So if you remember Asterix, there's cacophonics. The moment he takes up his harp, you see lions moving like cats and running away. So I don't like that kind of music. It jars. But I have come to a position where in the midst of all that I can still remain still. I don't like it, of course. I would prefer not to. But I can still say, okay. This is a training actually, through practice. But definitely cacophony is not music.
The question about the effect of music on cow milk production, follow up to that is that apparently research shows quite clearly that what music is played in a supermarket or in a clothes shop or whatever has an effect on what and how much people buy. As a musician, am nonetheless, I think I'm a little bit offended by the idea that music is used as a sort of manipulation, a metal for manipulation. It's not as bad as music being used as a medium for torture, but it's, yeah. So I kind of feel sorry for the cows, and but I feel a little bit sorry for customers in shops who go wanting to buy something and don't want to be manipulated by, buy more music.
Feelings from the provider of music and from the listener of music. How important is feelings? I'm talking about feelings communicated by the provider of music and listener of music.
I think well, you probably saw, when I listened to Mozart opera, and my wife is here, will tell you that it doesn't even have, that particular little recording is sublimely well done. For me, Mozart opera has an effect on me that it doesn't depend even on how well it's sung. There's something in the arrangement of the sounds that man managed that touches something in me, and I couldn't tell you whether it's happy or sad or whatever. It just makes me cry. It communicates with something very, very deep, and as I said earlier, I'm very grateful that still happens to me after 50-something years of going around the world trying to earn a living doing it. It's very easy to get cynical about that. I do think, though, that it is not it's not an okay thing to judge the quality of performance according to how well the feelings are, or whether you as a listener have the same feelings that I have as a performer. I don't think that's important. So I think if the person that you mentioned, the listener exactly the same feelings that he has himself, good for him, but that doesn't make him a better musician, and I don't think it makes the listener a better listener. I think it just happens, great, good, lucky for both of them, but it doesn't exclude all the others who had other feelings, and nor would it exclude a musician that would have intense feelings that for some reason or other don't communicate out there. He's going to stop us.
Could you please repeat words about angels, Bach and...
Oh, okay. Karl Barth was a Swiss theologian in the first part of the 20th century, not so long ago, who worked in Germany and had to leave because of the Nazis and so on and so on and so on. And there's some very lovely quotes by him. He was obvious. I never met him, but there are things that he said that are extremely sort of apposite. And one of them was that he imagined that when the angels play for God, they play Bach. But when they play en famille, when they play for themselves, they play Mozart.
Mozart.
Yes. And I, having spent a lot of my life very, very immersed in both those composers' works, I absolutely understand. But you can say, hey, Bach was the quintessential Lutheran Protestant, and Mozart was very Catholic, and very,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.